You're listening to the weekly Parsha Podcast with Ari Goldwag, recorded with Hashem's never-ending assistance in Ramat Beit Shemesh, Israel, 5785, 2025. This week's Parsha is Parshas Yisro. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God Himself, reveals Himself to the Jewish people, 1.5 million people strong, all at once. God speaks. And He gives the 10 Commandments. He gives us mitzvahs ben adam l'makom, commandments between man and God, mitzvahs ben adam l'chavero, commandments between man and his fellow. And the pasuk says right before, as an introduction, so understand that this is the introduction to one of the most foundational concepts and experiences of Am Yisrael, deforming experience of Am Yisrael, where God speaks to us and tells us His will directly. And the introduction is, pasuk right before, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, right before Hashem says, I am Hashem your God, I took you out of Egypt. The pasuk before that says, this is in chapter 20, verse 1, V'aydaber Elokim es kol hadvorim ha'ele lemor. God spoke all of these matters and said. Now the Medrash gives us a very interesting idea that's encapsulated in this pasuk. And it says like this, it's called Hadvarim ha'ele lemor. Why does the pasuk say it this way? God said all of these matters as follows. The Medrash lays down a foundational principle in the way that God interacts with the world. And he says like this, the Medrash says like this, God does everything at the same time. God is all-inclusive. God, there's no in Christian theology, there's the force of good, and there's a force of evil, a counterforce, as it were. The Satan, or Satan, is a counterforce against God. There's no such thing. Everything that we witness in the world, positive and negative, it's all from Him. God is all-inclusive. That's what we say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hashem, which is Rachamim, Elokeinu, which is Din. One is mercy, one is judgment. These are all aspects of the same one God, Hashem Echad. There's no separation in God. God includes all aspects. He's the ultimate oneness. Does it all at the same time. God gives, according to different explanations, there's different ways to understand this. We'll mention both. God gives life and takes away life at the same time. God kills and God gives life at the same time. And that can mean at the same moment, one person, Hashem is giving life to, a baby is born, just as someone else is passing away. But it could also mean the person himself experiences life and death at the same moment. And we'll see what this means. Hashem wounds a person and cures a person at the same time. We spoke about the fact that when Miriam was born, that last 86 years of Mitzrayim, of being in servitude and slavery in Egypt. So at the same moment that it intensified is when the Goyal, the beginning of the redemption was happening. Hashem brings a makkah, inflicts a wound, and at the same time He cures the person. Sometimes through the very wound, the person experiences a cure. Or, alternatively, Kadosh Baruch Hu at the same time causes someone to be hurt at the same time as He cures somebody else. Isha ala mashber. Interestingly, the Medrash enumerates the 4 cases, the 4 circumstances where there's an obligation to bring a korban toida, to bring a special thanksgiving offering to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to Hashem. Isha ala mashber, a woman who gave birth. So she brought life into the world, and at the same time, she was on the verge of death herself. Yordei Hayam. Someone goes on a boat, and there's incredible danger in the water. There's no way a human being can live there. But it's in order to get to another place, perhaps to have parnasa, to deal with one's livelihood. V'holchem midbara, if a person travels through a wilderness, a person lives in a place of death. You have the opposites. And we recognize in those opposites that it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's where we recognize it the most. The person is in danger of death. Chavushe b'bes asur, and someone who's a hostage, who's been taken into a dungeon. So they need to, when they come out, they need to bring a carbon taida. They need to recognize that the difficult situation that they're now out of is from Hashem as well. There are human beings all over the world, in the north, in the south, in the east, in the west. God hears everybody at the same time. God has no problem to hear millions of people praying to Him all at the same time and distinguish between each of their prayers and provide for each and every one of them what they need. So it's very interesting. We have here the duality that we experience in the world, coupled with the fact that God is unifying. God is the ultimate unity. He's a unifying factor. And for God, even though He's one and and His oneness precludes anything else, any changing, any disparity, nevertheless somehow, and it's one of the great mysteries, but somehow God includes all of the disparity and unifies it all. It's not a contradiction to His unity. The pasuk says, God creates light, He fashions light, and He creates darkness. And light here obviously is a spiritual concept, which is goodness, which is God's manifestation, where we see Hashem as it were in the world. But God also creates darkness where it seems like He's not. God is still where He's not. So the Medrash here is talking about the fact that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when God says the 10 Commandments, this is like, you want to know what's the introduction to Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am Hashem your God. What does God look like? So it's Vayidaber Elokim, it's Kol Hadvar Ma'ele. God says all these matters, all at the same time, all 10, as the Mefarshim explain, all 10 of the Aseres HaDibros, of the 10 Commandments, were said at the same moment, in the same breath, download. The Jewish people received the entire 10 Commandments in one word. It sounded, I don't know how that works. Or maybe we can relate to it. We think of, we speak about the difference between vision and hearing. Right? When you see something, you see a whole picture. Right? You see my garden. You see the trees behind me. You see the plumeria. You see the lemon tree behind me. You see the branches of the grapevine. You see the whole picture. And when it comes to hearing, though, concepts are conveyed one word after another word after another word after another word. So concepts, hearing, speaking, that's a different kind of communication. That's something that happens one at a time. And then at the end, it's complete. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when He communicated to Am Yisrael with Aseres HaDibros, they heard the sights and they saw the sounds, which means their experience of sound, which usually is one concept after another until it combines at the end, it was all at the beginning at once. Download. But now the Medrash says a different, or seemingly different, but really the same concept. And it says an amazing thing, and this is so foundational, we need to understand this. Hear this. It's even deeper. Right? There's a certain depth to understanding that HaKadosh Baruch Hu includes everything. All of the words, all of the concepts, there is a duality or a seeming duality, but really it's all one. Offer Kamaikim, but this is another aspect of the same concept. When we have dust, earth is similar. Nepach la'adam, chazar nepach la'ofar. We have something which is called dust or earth. Earth, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the pasuk says, God formed man out of earth. Conceptually, it means the human being is made out of the physical substance of reality. The human being, the physical aspect of the human being. And what happens after a person lives? He's formed from the earth. Think of Adam HaRishon, he's formed from the earth. Hashem, as it were, made a clay being, a being out of earth, breathed life into it. And then what happens at the end? He returns to the earth. He dies, Adam dies, and he goes back into the ground, he's buried. So you start off, a human being starts off as earth, he's given life, he's given form, he's given spirituality, and then the physical aspect of the human being returns to the earth. Pasuk says in Amos, chapter 5, verse 8, God switches or turns around or flips the morning to death, to the shadow of death. What does it mean? Which it sounds like he returns to the morning. He flips it back to the morning. What does it mean that in death there's a flipping back to the morning? Says the Medrash. It returns to its original way of being, to its original form. Originally the human being was earth, was dust. And he goes back to the way he was originally. In reality, we have a start point, we have a middle point, and we have a finish point. And the finish point, Noat's Reisha B'Soifis, says the Sefer Yetzirah. The ending is embedded in the beginning. Or the beginning is embedded in the ending. It's a circle. Life is a circle. We return back to where we started. The world started with God's oneness. We have a whole world of disparity. We have a world where we need direction. We need to be told what to do because physically we want to run away from God. We want to do the opposite of what God says. But God says, here, this is what unity looks like. It's called the Ten Commandments. It's called the Aseret HaDibros. It's called the Torah. And it's said in one word. It's said all at once in a download. Why? So we understand where we started from oneness. Where we're headed back to oneness. That's the goal. We find a few instances where it goes back to the way originally it was. The pasuk says that all of the water was turned into blood. It was flipped to blood. What happens afterwards? The blood turns back to water. Starts in a certain state, water, life. Goes to a state of dam, which is blood, which is death, which is separation. I think of dam nida, the concept of the woman's menstrual cycle. And then it goes back. It comes back to water. It comes back to life. The woman creates life. We find that Moshe Rabbeinu was given a sign. And this is the sign for Am Yisrael, for us to understand what's going on and what Geula looks like, what redemption looks like, because Moshe Rabbeinu was coming to redeem us, bring us back to our original state. The Jewish people naturally is not supposed to be in a state of separation, of distance from Eretz Yisrael, from the land of Israel, from God. We're supposed to be in a state of closeness, but we need the separation in order to get back to closeness. That's how it is. Moshe Rabbeinu was given a sign. His hand, Hashem says, put your hand inside of your jacket. He pulls it out, and it turned white. It became mitzayras. It became leprous. He puts his hand back in. He comes out. It goes back to being like flesh. It starts off like flesh. It comes out. It becomes something which is tameh, which is impure. It goes back, and it comes out pure again. Or it starts off live, normal flesh, goes to death, comes back to life. Life is the real state. We think of death as the real state, but it's wrong. Death is impermanent. Right? That's why we have Tchias HaMesim ultimately. There's going to be the revival of the dead, which is the real state of the way things are. Hashem is life, as it were. Pasuk says, B'chayta b'chaim. Hashem is life. Hashem is the life force of creation. Life is the way it's supposed to be, not death. Not like the Islamists. Hayam nepach liyabosha. We find that in the redemption of the Jewish people, what happens? we find that the water turns into dry land. Am Yisrael walks through dry land, through the sea on dry land. What happens after that? The dry land turns back to water and it destroys the Egyptians. And that's what redemption looks like. Things returning to the way they're supposed to be. I skipped one little thing here. What was the symbol of redemption that Moshe gave to Paro? He had a staff. The staff turns into a snake, and the snake represents the sin. It's not a coincidence that the pharaohs, the thing that represented them was a snake. It was separation from God. Paro says, the Nile is mine. I made myself. That's the separation from God. The lack of recognition, the snake. The lack of recognition of who's the balabayit here, who's in charge, who's the creator, whose will do we need to obey? We find seemingly contradictory statements within the Torah. So we have something that starts in one state, changes into a different state, and returns to the original state. That's the second aspect here of the Medrash. And here's a third aspect, and that is that you can find two things in the Torah which are contradictory, but they come from the same God. And they're both true. Eilu ve'elu divrei Elokim chaim. Kodesh Baruch Hu says you need to keep Shabbos. You're not allowed to light a fire on Shabbos. You're not allowed to slaughter animals on Shabbos. You're not allowed to do that. Everything needs to be prepared from before Shabbos. Remember the pasuk says, you're supposed to bring the carbon tamid just like every other day. And you're supposed to bring the daily sacrifices and the special Shabbos sacrifices on Shabbos, which means you need to slaughter them. You need to burn them on the Mizbeach. So the things that in one place might be prohibited, in another place, not only are they allowed, they're a mitzvah, it's an obligation. Find another contradiction in the Torah, as it were, where the Torah says a man is not allowed to marry his brother's wife. But the pasuk also says that if the brother dies without any children, one is obligated to marry his wife. Called Yibun, the levirate marriage. And understand that all of these things which are seeming contradictions were said at the same time. All of the Aseret Sadibros were said at the same time. They reflect a greater unity, even though they seem in our world to be contradictions. The separateness that we experience, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination that pushes us away from Hashem, pushes us away from God. The seeming disparity is for the purpose of ultimate unity. Even the Paro, the Nachash, the snake, which caused man to sin, it's really about getting us back to the state of unity, of oneness, of life. Where everything that you see in the world is a manifestation of Hashem, even where it seems like God is not manifest, it's still a manifestation of Hashem. Final point of the Medrash I'd like to read to you. The Medrash says, I want to show you something, that the attributes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu are different than the attributes of human beings. Let's say you have a king, a human king. He can't wage war and also walk in to the cheder, to the nursery school and teach the little children Aleph Beis. It just doesn't go together. You're a warrior, you're not a teacher. Listen to this beautiful medrash. God is not like that. Just before, 6 weeks before, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is battling with the Egyptians, destroying them. He's battling on behalf of Am Yisrael. God is a man of war. With his strength, God calms down the sea, meaning he uses the sea's calm to destroy Egypt. And then what happens 6 weeks later? on the 6th of Sivan, HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes down and teaches Torah to his children. He's teaching us Aleph Beis. That's the Aseres HaDibros. The same God, the same warrior. God is a warrior, or God is a teacher, a soft teacher. Pasuk says, who has the power that Hashem has? Who has that intense, massive strength that God has? And who is a teacher like him? So this is what the pasuk means when it says that God speaks all of these things. God encompasses all of these things. It's not a contradiction that God wages war on our behalf. It's not a contradiction. I'm just thinking, we have the warriors of Am Yisrael. We have Chaylei Tzahal. And we have the Lomdei Torah. Sounds like a contradiction. Those who study the Torah, those who are going out to battle. It's not a contradiction. They are both reflections of the ways that HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings us into oneness with Him, destroying our enemies, destroying their power, being the people we're meant to be, teaching us how to be the people we're meant to be. Both of these aspects are part of one greater aspect. I'd just like to share with you one more thought before we complete this Dvar Torah. It's an interesting thing. The Medrash says that things go back to the way they were. Kitchilaso. Kitchilaso. Things go back to the way they were. There's a reflection of unity. And I was thinking as I read this, one of the things it says about Am Yisrael is Bereshis Bar Elokim, God created in the beginning the world. Bereshis means Bishvil Yisrael Shenikraim Reshis. Chazal tell us Am Yisrael is called the beginning, the first. We know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the Even HaShasiyah, the foundation stone, which is underneath today the Dome of the Rock. It's the place of the Kodesh HaKodeshim, the Holy of Holies of the Beis HaMikdash. That rock, He created the world, and then He spread out the world from it. There's a point of beginning. There's a point of starting, of Tchila, where everything extends from, and all of the disparity, or seeming disparity, comes into existence. I got the sun in my face here, so I'm going to just lean forward. I hope it's okay. You have all of the seeming disparity. And it comes out of the unity. But where does it starts? It starts in a certain way. Let me ask you something, okay? And this is really the first Rashi of Bereshis, but let me ask you something. Who was here first? Who was first? Was Am Yisrael first? The nations of the world were first? Avram Avinu was 10 generations after Noach. Abraham, who started the Jewish religion, he was promised, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said He's going to send His descendants down into Egypt and they're going to come out and receive the Torah. But he wasn't first. What do you mean He's first? Avram, we find, is first. Am Yisrael is called first. We weren't first. What does it mean first? It comes to let's just think about this conceptually. Who is first, Yaakov or Esav? Esav is born first, but Yaakov is first. Yosef is one of the last of the sons to be born, of the Shvatim, but Yosef is called first. Ephraim is not born first, but Yaakov puts him first when he gives the blessings. What looks like first, look at the Christian world, look at the Islamic world, billions of people. Look at the Chinese, 1 billion people. Maybe they're first. Maybe they're right. First doesn't manifest, doesn't look like what we think of as first. This is what first means. This is what Bereshis, the beginning, looks like. It has to do with where it's supposed to head back to. It has to do with unity. The Christian world, I've said this many times, but I'll say it again. The Christian world is a world of, you could call it love, the West, unbounded love, without the balance of Yisro, without the proper balance of fear. According to them, their Messiah because of his death, everyone is forgiven of all their sins. That's a pretty free pass. And the world of Islam is the opposite. It's too much yira, too much fear. God is an angry God. We have to obey him. Islam, we need to bow all the way onto the floor in complete submission. And there's truth to that as well. But if it's all fear, it's not balanced. See, what you get from this medrash is that you need both. There's the dual aspects are part of a greater unity. If you have one without the other, you're in trouble. You need both. You need the yira and you need the ahava. You need the fear and you need the love. You need the separation and you need the unity. Am Yisrael has that special balance. That's why we're called rashis. We have the characteristic of unity, of recognizing the balance between what seems to be disparate. In the Islamic world, you can't have too much love. It will ruin you. They're fighting the West. Death to America. Death to Israel. They're fighting the West. They're fighting that unbounded, or seemingly unbounded Israel. We could discuss what Israel means, but that unbounded nature of the West. And the other way is also true. They're fearful of this intensity of the Islamic world. The Christian world is afraid of that. The Western world is afraid of that. And rightfully so. But really we need both aspects, and that's where Am Yisrael is, and that's why we're called rashis. That's why we're called the Tchila. We're called the first. Avram is the first, not because he came first, but because he recognized what's first. It's God who is all-encompassing in unity. I am Hashem, your God, who took you out of Egypt. I'm transcendent, but yet I'm also involved personally in your life. That's impossible. God is aloof, maybe, heaven forbid. God is beyond this world. What does he have to do with me in my life? That's wrong. God is transcendent, and yet he's also here. He cares about the entire universe, and he cares about little old me. That's what rashis means. That's what the first means. And it's all about going back to the beginning. It's always about going back to the first, going back to this. The more all-inclusive, the more inclusive all the aspects are. We understand that the things that seem to be contradictory are not contradictory. The things that seem to be, how can they coexist? The more we recognize that everything is part of God's unity, the more we are first. The more we are resonating with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God can battle. God is a warrior. And God is a gentle teacher. It's not a contradiction. The same God. The same God has an attribute of mercy. We experience his attribute of mercy, which seems completely the opposite of his attribute of justice. And somehow, they're part of a greater whole. God encompasses both of these. So I bless you and I ask you to bless me. That we should be able to hear as kol hadvarim ha'eleh. We should be able to hear all of these matters and see them all and recognize all of that which seems to be disparity. To be part of a greater whole, which is godliness. Kadosh Baruch Hu should help us to recognize this and to seek that unity, to seek to be first, to seek to be inclusive, to seek both love and fear of Hashem. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful Shabbos.
This podcast was made possible through the gracious donations of listeners like you. For more podcasts like this, please visit www.arigoldwag.com or search on iTunes Ari Goldwag.